in a long. There we go. All right.
Okay, that's good, right.
Yeah.
I had a good thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for coming to shul in the first place, and those of you that are watching along and not watching the rugby instead. But God willing, they'll kick that etrog through the two lulavs and we'll score the points and see what happens after Shabbat. Anyway, so Chag Sameach to all of you. I want to give you guys a very quick vote today, see how long my voice will last. So today is special on two levels. First of all, we're still in the middle of the celebration of the festival of Sukkot, but it is also an extra celebration on top of that, right? You get pudding twice today. It's also Shabbat. You get that extra chocolate today as well. And we get to combine two of the holiest commandments in the Torah, the celebration of the festival of Sukkot, and of course, the celebration weekly of the Sabbath. And it's very interesting that both of these elements that we're celebrating on this particular day, both of them are a foretaste of the Messianic era, the Shabbat and the festival of Sukkot. Sukkot, of course, is known as Chag HaAsif, which is the festival of the ingathering, the harvest festival, which of course points towards the great and final harvest at the coming of Messiah, when we'll all be transported up there, and hopefully free flights without having to do a COVID test and wear a mask in the airplane, to the land of Israel, and we'll be able to dwell there in the Messianic era for those 1,000 years, God willing. And we've just come through the judgment of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Now it's time to chill. It's supposed to be a foretaste of the Messianic era, and all the nations in the world, it tells us in the prophet Zechariah, will have to come up to Jerusalem on the festival of Sukkot to bring an offering for their land, so that their land can also have some rain in its season. And similarly, Shabbat, the weekly Sabbath, is also a foretaste of the Messianic era, because how do we greet each other on Saturdays? Shabbat Shalom, may you have a Sabbath of peace, because the Messianic era is meant to be the era of peace, the 1,000 years of peace. We refer to it as a Yom Shekelo Shabbat, time that is all Shabbat. So if you think it's nice to take 25 hours off every week, just wait until we get to the Messianic era. We'll have 1,000 years of Shabbat to keep. My mom's already started cooking. Okay. So today I want to explore this connection between both the Sabbath and Sukkot and how they link us to the Messianic era. Because if you look closely, there's a very fishy connection between the two. So today I want to get a little fishy with my sermon. So yesterday when I was sitting in the Sukkah, and actually these last 2 days, there's been one recurring theme that I've been talking about with people that came to visit me in my Sukkah, or things that me and Rebecca discuss in the Sukkah, or me and Judah discussing things. I've been completely bombarded with the idea of a fish. Fish here, there, and everywhere. Every single thing I talk about is fish. From the smallest things, like, for example, Judah this week, he finally started his first lessons in swimming, teaching the young man how to swim. He's not going to Khari Goudvis, but he's going to another teacher. But anyway, he's learning to swim, and Rebecca is the only one who's allowed to go in because of the COVID rules. I'm not allowed to go in. So we're sitting in the Sukkah, and Rebecca comes back and shows me the video of how little Judah is finally learning how to swim. And I'm proud to say the man swims like a fish. He is an expert. He's doing the crocodile crawl underneath the pool noodle, and he's doing the monkey walk on the side, and the teacher's throwing the fishes, and he's fetching the fishes, but he fetches it with his mouth because he's a crocodile, of course. He fetches the fish with his mouth, and he throws it the other side, and he goes that way. And it's fantastic to watch my son do these things and see how excited he is about swimming, because he goes into that pool and he does it with his whole body. Every inch of his soul is swimming and jumping around and splashing, and he's loving it. And as me and Becca are watching these videos in our Sukkah of Judah swimming, I'm realizing that, you know what? There are only 2 commandments out of all 613 that we can do with our entire body. What are those 2 commandments? I say, just tell us. The first one is similar to what Judah's doing. The mikvah, baptism in a pool of water. Your entire body needs to be immersed in that body of water for you to fulfill that commandment. And the other commandment, which we do with the entire body, is the sukkah, sitting in the shade of the sukkah, dwelling in our sukkahs that we have built. Now, sages tell us when we enter that sukkah, it's as if God gives us an all-encompassing hug. He embraces us because our entire body, our entire being has come into the house of the Lord. That's what we're supposed to meditate on when we enter the sukkah. Now, later on, we eventually had some other guests come visit us. That guests pretty much every day this week. And one of our guests, one of the kids, was intrigued by the fact that Rebecca is not from South Africa. So the first question was, what do you guys eat in Sweden? And Rebecca had to explain some of the most traditional foods in Sweden. And one of the traditional foods they eat there in Sweden is rotten fish. Rotten herring that's been rotting for about a year in a can. horrible stuff. But this is one of their traditional foods. So she explains to the kid, we eat this rotten herring. So it's getting even fishier and fishier in our sukkah. And lo and behold, last night I went to my parents' house for Shabbat meal, as we're entering the Sabbath now in Sukkot. And what was on the table? Chopped herring. And that Judah, oh, he dug into that herring. He was cheeks filled with fish, with chopped herring. Well, we did bribe him by putting it on a sugar cookie, but he was loving his herring. And I thought to myself, okay, this kid has got a little bit of Swedish in him, right? So why do we eat fish on Shabbat? We all know this is a tradition that on the Friday night table, you should try at least every week to have fish as a starter. But there's a reason for this. Why do we have to have fish on Shabbat? Is it because the rabbi was in the family that sold fish? The fishmonger? What's the reason we're supposed to have fish on Shabbat? Does anyone know? There we go. There's a lot of symbolism. May you be fruitful and multiply like the fish. Right? Especially for you that's not married yet. We're trying to get you there. Say again? There we go. Because the fish that we eat on Friday night is supposed to point us to something in the future. If the Sabbath is meant to be a foretaste of the Messianic era, then maybe we should taste some of the food we're going to eat in the Messianic era. And what is that great meal going to be consisting of in the Messianic era? The Leviathan, the fish of the Leviathan. In addition to that, we're also going to have meat, some beef from the great behemoth, the great ox. We're going to have these massive T-bone steaks the size of a sukkah, right? And what are we going to drink at this meal? Where does the wine come from? Not Cape Town. From the Garden of Eden. It was a very fine year that year. We're going to drink wine from the Garden of Eden. That's the meal that we're going to have. And that's why every week we're supposed to, on Shabbat, supposed to have a foretaste of the Messianic era at our Sabbath table. Now the Leviathan, I want to chat a bit about the Leviathan since I'm being very fishy this morning. Because the Leviathan, tradition tells us, was created on the 5th day of creation. God created the Leviathan, male and female. He created 2 of them. Like everything in creation, God created male and female, the Talmud tells us. There were 2 Leviathans, 2 of these great giant sea monsters, these sea snakes. But God saw a problem. The Leviathan, according to God, would end up destroying the world. Not only would it eat up all the fish like the Japanese are doing to our seas, but it would destroy the world. And this is on a spiritual level. The Leviathan represents the spirituality of this world, and the behemoth represents the physicality of this world. But anyway, however it's explained, Leviathan would end up destroying the world. So what does God do? He slaughters one of the fish, one of those 2 fish, the female Leviathan, so that it can't multiply and make more Leviathans. And what does God do after he slaughters that fish? Like anyone who knows their way around the kitchen, you pickle the fish. You put it in a jar, put some vinegar in there, and locked it up and said, one day, when the Messianic era comes around, then I will feed my children the flesh, the fish of the Leviathan. So we're going to have some pickled herring one day, Leviathan herring in the future. And when we sit at that meal, which we call the Messianic banquet in the future, what is that supposed to remind you of today? In this week that we're in? Sukkot, the festival of Sukkot, because we're not going to sit there alone and each going to have our own little takeaway and isolate in your corner of the restaurant. Who are we going to sit with and eat at that meal? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, who else? Joseph, Moses, David, Messiah. Right, Messiah's got to do the blessing for us at this meal. And have we not been doing this entire week? Every night we invite into our sukkahs one of the ushpazin, one of our guests. And the last night was, I believe, Moshe. Depends on which lineage you guys use. Everyone's got different people that they invite every night. So we are practicing this at that time already now. We're practicing something for the future on a weekly basis, not only on Sabbath, but also through the festival of Sukkot. All right, so the one fish has been slaughtered and pickled, so that one day we can have it on, what do you call those crackers we have the fish on? On the kichel, yes. You have chopped herring on kichel. But there's still another fish that is alive. The male Leviathan is apparently still hiding somewhere in the depths of the ocean. Now, I heard a story this week in my sukkah, another fishy story that I want to share with you quickly before I chat about this one. So the story goes that there was a Talmud Chacham, or a rabbi, an extremely educated man, who was one day going for a stroll along the beach. And as he was walking along the beach, he noticed there was someone waving from the waters in the sea. And this poor guy was drowning. He was shouting out, help, help, help. Now, this Talmud Chacham, he himself didn't know how to swim. He also didn't go to class at Geri Goudvis. So he also didn't know how to swim. So he went and scuttled around on the beach and finally found a rope, and he threw the rope into the sea next to the guy, and he shouted to the guy saying, if you want to live, grab the rope. If you don't grab the rope, then send my regards to Rabbi Leviathan. Now, this is actually a story, not a joke, but it doubles up as a joke. So why does he say this? Why does he say, send my regards to Rabbi Leviathan? Because it says, the Leviathan. That's what he calls the Leviathan, Rabbi Leviathan. Send my regards to the Leviathan if you don't grab the rope and save your life and end up drowning. It's play on words. Now, this story is told of a great Hasidic Rebbe. He tells the story that he did this one day. And the people couldn't believe that he would say something like this. They say to him, the guy's about to drown. He's at the depths of his life. He's about to die. And you make a joke? Send my regards to Rabbi Leviathan. Wink, wink. How can you make a joke at a time so dire as this? The rabbi says to them, this is a lesson about the festival of Sukkot. Because what are we doing by dwelling outside in our flimsy, fragile, I was going to say flammable, sukkahs that gets battered by the wind and the rain and the storm every year? We're reminding ourselves that life is temporary. Life can be gone in an instant. Nothing in this world, physicality, is permanent. One day it's all going to go, right? When you get buried, you don't get any pockets in your clothes because you can't take anything with you. But what is the other commandment of Sukkot, other than taking the lulav and the etrog? Vesamachta bechagecha. It is a commandment, joyful, in this festival of Sukkot. While you sit outside, being beaten by the sun, beaten by the wind, sitting in the heat of that sukkah, you are commanded to be joyful. So the rabbi said, this is the lesson, that even when you are in dire straits, even when you think you're about to die, God tells us, you should still find joy in something that translates beyond this physical era, beyond this life. And where do we find our joy? In the Messianic era. That's why Yeshua tells us, we spoke about this on Tuesday, that your lifestyle must be a kingdom lifestyle, because our focus is not in this world. Our focus is in the world to come, when we're going to sit and have that meal with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So, back to the male Leviathan that's still apparently roaming the sea somewhere. He's the one that's causing all the tsunamis around the world. The male Leviathan, according to tradition, will be slaughtered in the future. There's this whole tradition of the behemoth is going to end up fighting against the Leviathan. And then God's going to take that fresh fish on that day and serve it to us at that messianic banquet. So we'll have some sushi at that day as well. Not just the pickled herring, we'll also have some nice sashimi. You can add some wasabi, and we can have a good time. But God doesn't waste anything of the fish, because we have another tradition when it comes to Sukkot that says God will use the skin of the Leviathan. Right? So we're going to say this on Tuesday afternoon after Simchat Torah, after Shemini Atzeret, when we all have to say farewell to our sukkah. We say that God will one day make a sukkah from the skin of the Leviathan. And the Talmud gives us a tradition about it. And what we say is, as we have sat in the sukkah for all 8 days of the festival of Sukkot, so may we merit to one day sit and dwell in the shade of the sukkah that you will make of the skin of the Leviathan in the Messianic era. May this be true next year in Jerusalem. So I know what you're thinking. What on earth is that sukkah going to smell like? Well, the entire roof is made of skin, of fish skin. Don't be troubled. Jonah has done this before. Just the other day we read about Jonah, who was in the belly of the whale. Put that aside. But our sages tell us that that sukkah that Hashem is going to build for us in the Messianic era is going to be the biggest sukkah in the world, because all of Israel, even those grafted into Israel, will be gathered from the 4 quarters of the earth into that one sukkah, and we're going to sit under the shade of the skin of the Leviathan. And what do you call it when you take all the Jews in the world and you put them under one fish? You call it gefilte fish. Okay? This is why every Shabbat we eat fish. We eat gefilte fish to remind us of the future when we will sit in that sukkah together as one. Now, the skin of the Leviathan, the Talmud goes on to talk about the skin of the Leviathan, telling us that the skin is going to be this extremely shiny, glittering, reflective skin, almost like a mermaid, if we slaughtered a mermaid, right? And the skin is going to be there, and there's a reason why it needs to be like this, because we need light. How many of you have struggled with getting light inside your sukkah this week? I struggled. At first, the small little lights that I put up weren't strong enough, and then my spotlight for my house that was supposed to shine into the sukkah, I couldn't open the sukkah wall, so I couldn't get the light in there. And Rebecca tells me, Sydney, you have to be the light, etc., etc. So I struggled with the light in my sukkah this year. I don't know how it was for you guys, but when it comes to the Messianic era, the Talmud tells us that the skin of the Leviathan is going to be reflective like that, because where will our light come from? The light of Messiah will shine forth from Jerusalem to the ends of this earth. The whole world will see the light of the Messiah. And it's very interesting because today we have a specific parasha for this day. Because it's a special Sabbath, we don't read our regular parasha reading, which would be the end of Deuteronomy. We're going to do that on Tuesday. Today we have a special reading from Exodus chapter 33 and 34, which relates for us the story of Moses ascending the mountain for the second time to get the second set of tablets. And when Moses comes down with the second set of tablets, something is different. He was up there and he used some ponds, some Nivea men cream. Because when he came down, what happened? His face was glowing with the radiance and the glory of God. So much so that it blinded the people. They had to put on their shades because they were a bunch of shady characters. And Moses had to put on a veil. Every time Moses went to speak with God, then he could take off the veil and get more of the radiance of God. But every time he came out to the people, he had to put on his face mask. Many of you guys are doing today, so that he wouldn't blind the people. And it's an amazing thing that that's today's parasha, because I was reading a commentary from the Midrash about this that explains why Moses' face was radiating like that. Was because when he went up to receive the Torah, according to this Midrash, has three different facets. There is the written Torah, the Bible as you have it in front of you, with its holy teachings from God. But then there is a middle section of the Torah, which most humans don't ever get to experience. And this middle section of the Torah is what Moses heard from God at this moment that he went up the mountain a second time. God revealed to him this divine aspect of the Torah, which you can't teach, according to the Midrash. You can't teach in words to someone else. You can only get this section of the Torah, this teaching of the Torah, by being in the presence of someone of that greatness. And what is this section of the Torah called? The Midrash calls it the Torah of Messiah. Because Moses could experience that Torah of Messiah, it emanated from his own face out towards the people. And he couldn't communicate it because it's not Torah of words. It's a different type of Torah. It's unwritten. You can only experience it by being part and being close to that light of the Messiah. And then there's a third part of the Torah, the Midrash says, that only God knows. We will never be able to understand. It's in his infinite wisdom. So this Wednesday night in Torah Club, we were studying a similar story in the Gospels. Because Yeshua went up a mountain as well, just like the story of Moses. And he went up there with three of his disciples, Peter, James, and John. And while he was up there, we have the story of the Transfiguration. And what happens in the Transfiguration? He also gets some ushpazim, some visitors, Moses and Elijah, right? And what does Peter say when he sees them? Let us build for them 3 sukkahs. They can chill out with us and we can do a brocha with them and have some l'chaim. And then what happens to Yeshua's face? The exact same thing as Moses. Yeshua starts blasting out this light, this eminence, this presence of God at that moment. Why? Because when Moses and Elijah came down to confirm Yeshua's mission that he would be the suffering servant, the Torah of Messiah emanated from Yeshua's face as well. It's amazing, an amazing connection. And this is why, as we're going to read today, when you guys get home, the book of Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, in chapter 8, verse 1, it tells us, wisdom lights up the face of man. It was the Torah of Messiah that lit up the face of Moses in this week's parasha, today's parasha, and it's the Torah of Messiah that lit up Yeshua's face when he was up there on the Mount of Transfiguration. And this is teaching us as well a lesson about the Messianic era in the future. That when that skin of the Leviathan makes that sukkah for us and it reflects, what? Reflects the light in the Torah of Messiah. Because what are we going to learn? If we haven't learned everything by now already, what are we going to learn in the Messianic era? The Messiah will sit on Mount Zion and teach the Torah to us. Through his teaching, the wisdom of the Messiah, the light will go out to all the world. So there's a very simple lesson I want to share with you today, specifically on this day, where we get to celebrate these two wonderful things, the Sabbath and Sukkot, in relation to the Messianic era, that we have a very special opportunity today, Ayom, to have a foretaste of the Messianic era just by sitting in your sukkah on the Sabbath, doing the Kiddush last night in your sukkah on the Sabbath, going to have a meal after the service here and singing songs of the Sabbath in your Sukkah. Tonight, ending off the Sabbath by lighting the candle and doing Havdalah. These are special tastes of the Messianic era, a smorgasbord, if you will, that you can't have any other day of the year except for today. This day is doubly infused with the taste of the Messianic era. So let us jump like Judah with our whole body into the Sukkah today, this afternoon, for the rest of the Sabbath. Maybe try and eat some fish and imagine what it will be like that day when we can eat the sushi of the Leviathan. Maybe if you're eating beef or a lamb or something like that, think about those giant T-bones that we're going to have of the behemoth in the Messianic era. When you're drinking your wine this afternoon in your Sukkah, imagine that it tastes like that fine wine that was made from the beginning of time, as if you were drinking it in your Sukkah today with the Messiah. So I encourage you today, afternoon, take a bite, have a taste, take a sip of the Messianic era, and prepare yourself for that fine day when God will gather all of us from the ends of earth under the Sukkah of the Leviathan, and we'll be able to not only learn from the Messiah, but to experience the radiance of the Torah of the Messiah. And one day we too will shine forth thanks to the teachings of our Master.
Amen and amen.
Chag Sameach.